Hello everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be looking over the tier list for 1121. So as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. Check out the rest of the offerings as well. Gonna do a patch notes probably today, maybe tomorrow. And then I just released an analysis of the new proposed items for the PvE as well, and we're going to be doing some more Warhammer content if you're interested in that. And I've been doing some more prof talks recently as well, so talking about whether or not support is the worst role, what does it mean to succeed as support, among other things. They're just kind of going on in the community. And I'll probably do one about that all chat restriction they've done. They've since rescinded that, but I just want to talk about sort of what's the theory behind that, toxicity in League, and what some of the best things to deal with that might be. But anyways, let's go ahead and get into this tier list. Oh, and we are streaming. I still have people that ask, about the streaming. We are streaming still, but we're on Twitch now all the time, right? So it's usually from about 11:30 or midnight until about 3 a.m. Eastern Standard Time every night. So be sure to check it out. Friendly, chill community. And if you like the content and you have a Twitch Prime, you might as well, go ahead and use that Prime. It helps out a lot. Okay. Let's go ahead and get in here. So I've shuffled up the list a little bit. It's some of the usual suspects up near the top, but there have been some adjustments. So Yuumi I have as number 1 right now overall. So this one jumped quite a significant amount. I think I had her in B list last time. But then just kind of out of nowhere at Worlds, people started playing her, and she became a pretty high priority pick. She's actually the most banned support by a mile. Almost, just about 2.5 times as much as Leona. So banned a lot. Her win rate's not insane, right? It's about 50% total, but nevertheless, she is still quite a menace. And they're doing some interesting builds. They've gone back to Ludens on her as well, which is somewhat unusual. The last few picks, I guess, have been Moonstone, but during the play-ins, a lot of people were picking Ludens for the most part. And they had tried to move her away from the Ludens proc by hitting her AP ratio. And now the scaling on the W is based on the person you're attached to, not your own personal AP. So that disincentivizes Ludens as well. So it's kind of some interesting choices there, but the main reason that she's strong is one of the reasons that she's always been strong is that as an enchanter, she's able to get mobility and get tankiness through other champions. And so that means that she doesn't have to buy boots, first of all. And so that's 950 gold in your pocket from not having to buy Ionians, which is very, very strong, especially when a lot of support items are, 2,500 gold or less that she's going to be buying outside of Ludens if you go for that option. But it saves you a ton of gold, and it's really hard to pick her off late game in team fights because she just stays attached. And even in a team fight, if you kill the person she's attached to, she can probably just attach to somebody else. So she's just a real menace to try to kill. And those are, at least that latter point is one that makes a lot of enchanters historically pretty weak, especially in higher levels of play, just because they can get blown up trying to get vision or trying to position in team fights. You're just really going to be vulnerable. So that has remained the same. One thing that really changed about her in recent times that I really underestimated was they changed the proc rate on her passive in the early game to be 4 seconds less. So this passive right here, whenever you auto attack somebody, you get a pretty decent little shield, and it gives you back a lot of mana. So it had been an 18-second proc, and now it's 14 seconds. So that's really huge. In the early game, you can just keep spamming your Qs and just keep auto attacking, get the shield, get the sustain, and then just almost have infinite mana in the laning phase. That makes her much, much more difficult in attrition matchups where people can't force an all in on her if she can hide behind the minions. And if she's just having poke wars with other people, then it's going to be quite strong. So she obviously still scales really well, but it's also just this passive that has made her much, much better in the early game. So if they don't have something like a Thresh or a Leona that's constantly threatening on the front line to get her, then she can be quite strong. Now, outside of Ludens, which did get a buff, they lowered it down to 3,200 gold, which helps her out a lot on a support budget if you want to go for that. You also have Moonstone, which has had numerous buffs as well, particularly when you start stacking it with other plus healing and shielding items. So something like a redemption, for example, is going to be massive on her. So they increased Moonstone a few patches ago to where it now gives you up to a 35% bonus on all of your healing and shielding, which includes redemption, which includes your natural heal on your E, it includes your shield on your passive. All of that stuff's going to get a huge bonus. So it's not as strong earlier on. It only restores 70 health to start with. But once you factor in those other plus healing and shielding items, it's going to be really good. And I assume Shrelia's is probably still pretty good on her as well. It's actually better than Moonstone is on her. You don't see a lot of people getting that, but that does give her the movement speed. And whenever you jump around to different people and give them airy, that does give them that movement speed for Shrelia's. So when you're rotating around the map, you can hop off of someone every 4 seconds and then hop back on to give them that little bit of bonus movement speed. So underestimated, but quite strong. And it's the same thing with Moonstone, where if she keeps jumping around to different people, then she's going to keep that Moonstone active as long as somebody stays in combat. So overall, good itemization options, very strong champion. Still not going to be a super powerhouse early, but if your team can just stick around in the game, then she is going to be quite strong. Her win rate hasn't changed that much overall. She's still about 50% win rate, which she always is. But you can see it's just kind of going up and up and up here. But fights have been a bit more extended because people aren't playing high burst assassins as much. Even if people play things like Zed and Talon, a lot of people have been doing like the Gore Drinker Sterix kind of builds on those. So it is extending games, taking away a lot of like the hard burst and moving more towards those aggressive options. And just like some of the other enchanters, she can also get this Chemtech Putrefier, which is a very, very good second item. So it gives the 60% Grievous Wounds. It only costs 2,300 gold, and it just has all kinds of stats that she wants. She doesn't care that it doesn't have health on it. It's just got the ability power, ability haste, and mana regen. So it's just a perfect item on her. So I think that just puts her in a really good position. She's, gets 950 free gold in her pocket. She gets her choice of several different powerful first item options. She has excellent second item options. You do have the best Grievous option, in my view, but then you also have other things that can power up your team quite a bit, like Staff of Flowing Water or Ardent Censer. So I just think she's a powerhouse, especially if you have anyone on your team that has invisibility, like a Rengar, an Eve, or a Twitch. She gets to go invisible too when she attaches to them. Or does anyone that has a lot of mobility, right, like an Ezreal or a LeBlanc, then you get to, make good use of that mobility too. So overall, really, really strong champion right now. You just have to deal with her. If you just don't win the game by 20 minutes, it becomes extremely difficult because there are so many champions right now that can 1v9 snowball in other lanes, and she just helps them get really out of control. So I think that she is really good. She probably has been good for a couple of patches. I don't think she's always been S-class. I think that this, buff to her passive was massive. I think that the buff to Moonstone was massive. So there have been really big changes over the last few patches that have helped her. Also, Leona has been nerfed. The meta has shifted away from the assassins building lethality items to those, like I said, more bruiser items. So there have been real changes. It's not that people just didn't know about her, right? There might be a little bit of that for like I said, maybe 1 or 2 patches, but it really has been meta shifts, different nerfs, different buffs around her that have helped make her a lot stronger. And then we've got Rakan, always disrespected, but always strong. So many tier lists have him ranked really low. I just remember seeing a lot of these Worlds tier lists, and they don't even have him in like tier 3 or something. They got him in like gutter tier. I'll let you guys in on a secret about Rakan that you may or may not know. He's probably, since his inception, I would classify him as the most successful support in professional play. And I know it's not the same as solo queue, but just look at his track record, right? If you look at picks at this Worlds, he has a 67% win rate overall, and he's the second most picked champion. No one was predicting him to do well, except for me, at high level play. I mean, maybe there were a couple people, but a lot of people were really underestimating him. Leona had been doing very well at Worlds, but she's just kind of fallen off a cliff, right? And then Yuumi sort of has shown up over the last, few weeks, but she doesn't have a phenomenal win rate. People just don't want to deal with her. But even if you go back in time, like season 7 or season 10 was his worst season, and he still went 50-50. Then he was still represented in season 10. So it's not like he was horrible. He just wasn't like, super dominant. But if you look here, about a 50% win rate, 30% presence, not bad. But every other season, he's just been a powerhouse. So he's like the number 2 most picked and the highest win rate by an extremely large margin this season. And then if you look at World Championships over in season 9, second most picked champion, highest win rate. High win rate. Okay, Leona, slightly less picked, also a high win rate. But still really, really good. Very high win rate, high pick rate. Look at season 8. Look at Worlds over here. Well, look who it is. The highest pick rate, the highest win rate, until you start to get down to, 17% presence. So completely dumpstered the season 8 Worlds. Season 7 was when he was released. Right? And people forget about this. They're like, oh, that was the Enchanter meta. Well, yeah, sort of. Yes, Janna was totally dominant there, but there's Rakan, third most picked, super high win rate, right? Not super high, but not Janna high, but like really high. Like he was the second most impactful support in that meta. Lulu was picked a lot, but she had a really low win rate of 40%. So I was saying his worst outing was a 50%, and he was still like a top 5 or top 6. And then every other year, he's been top 3 and, top 1 or 2 in terms of win rate. So he's just a super dominant champion if he's played really well. Now, some people might say, well, that doesn't translate into solo queue always. That's true, but it does demonstrate that his ceiling is really high. And I don't think you have to have a ton of super coordinated play to make him work. Obviously, that's useful, but he has a lot of tools to help him out, right, in the chaos of, YOLO queue as well. It's just he's really hard to make decisions on, and it's very easy to bait yourself into trying to do too much, to try to take engages you shouldn't take, to try to save people you shouldn't save, and most importantly, to try to, CC more people than is safe to do. I find this happening to me, and I've played a ton of Rakan, is, you'll engage, you'll get that one person when you're W, and you'll be, you might think, oh, well, there's just one other person that's kind of close to them. Maybe I can run at them, with this extra movement speed and get that last piece of CC. But then you step just outside of range of being able to E back to your allies, and you get blown up before you can get back in range. So it's all about calibrating that, not just the engage, but how many people, how you can get, how greedy can you be in terms of that CC and still get out of there alive. So that's a lot different from other tanks who just basically only have to make the decision on go in, right? You go in, you stay in there, and you either win the fight or you die trying, right? A lot of times. Rakan is built to really work around that agility. He does not want to stay in there. He will get blown up. It's very inefficient to buy super tanky items on him for the most part. Because if played correctly, if using that agility correctly, he can get a lot of utility items other tanks don't have great access to, like Shirelia's, like the Putrefier, right? So it's very similar items to Yuumi, but he has fantastic engage on top of that. So that's the thing about Rakan, and you see he has a similar chart to Yuumi as well. He does not fall off. He gets better and better and better as the game goes on because he can get those items that scale really well. So he's very strong. He's got all that mobility that I mentioned. He can engage and disengage at the same time. He can escape. He can get deep vision. He can buff up your allies in a variety of different ways. He can get the enchanter items. He can even get something like Knight's Vow on a pinch if he wants to help out a little bit more against assassins. And just the fact that he takes Guardians and he has 2 really sizable shields. People look at these and think they're dinky. Oh, it's just 140 shield. You got to remember, you can apply that twice, and it's a non-decaying shield. So think of it as a 280 shield with a 1.6 AP ratio, because that's really what it is. And you compare that to something like a Janna, who has a 240 shield that decays, that only has, I think it's like a 0.7 AP ratio. So he scales extremely well with AP, far better than people think he does. So he's just really, really good. He's got Engage and Enchanter, and he's one of the only champs that does that super well. So I think he's a fantastic champion, extremely versatile, very good itemization, and it's just always the case. Because of his kit, that's why he's so successful all the times. It's like, even if Shirley's gets nerfed, it's like, okay, he can get Mandate. Mandate gets nerfed, alright, we can just do Locket then. Locket gets nerfed, alright, he could even do Moonstone if he had to. It's probably not, like, amazing. It has a good-looking win rate, but he could do it. He could make anything work. In any meta, some are going to be, more favorable than others, obviously. But just due to the nature of his flexibility, he's just always going to be, a competitive champ. So a lot of it just comes down to how well you play him, how well you maximize his kit, because the skill ceiling is extremely high. There are a lot of decisions, and you can mess a lot of stuff up. So I think he can be good in solo queue. A lot of people just don't commit to learning him very well, kind of like Thresh. But I think he is a little bit, maybe even more versatile than Thresh. That's a debatable statement. But I think that his Engage is going to be more likely to succeed than Thresh, because you can run through and get to that back line. You don't have to fish for hooks that frontline people can absorb. So, anyways, I think that he's fantastic right now. I'd highly recommend trying him out. Blitzcrank is another one that I've been playing a lot. He does have a high win rate right now, and I think he does fit in really well with the meta overall. He's a little bit more risky because if you don't take over the game early, he does kind of fall off a cliff later. And this chart needs a little bit of contextualization. If they have tanks that can soak those hooks, or if you're losing the game and they get a lot of vision on you and you can't get good catches from bushes, because there are a lot of champions with a lot of mobility in the game right now, then he is going to fall off. And he doesn't do a lot in team fights. If you don't pick somebody off and blow them up like immediately, he doesn't have a lot to offer. And his items are just horrible. He just doesn't do anything with items. Like, you can get Locket and Redemption or something, but obviously it's not going to have a ton of utility. It's just all about how often can you hit those hooks, can you run around, can you make plays. Now, I will say that a lot of champions right now are on the squishy side. So if you pull them out of position, you can kill them, right? If you manage to, grab the Sona, grab the Soraka, you can blow them up. And that has been the case in a lot of roles. I think that some tanks are starting to come back in. At least I'm seeing a few more anecdotally. Like, I've seen some Sejuanis, I've seen some more Nunus. They're starting to get good win rates again. Nunu's one of those champs where you can't hold him down for long, and he's almost got a 54% win rate. You really don't want to see those types of champs as Blitzcrank. Like, you might be able to kill him early on if you get a hook, but then later on, it's just really, really hard to blow them up. So, there are still a decent chunk of assassins out there, but the meta is shifting a little bit closer towards, tanks starting to come back around. You're seeing, Tom Kench almost has a 54% win rate here. You're seeing, more Malphites, Garens, Dariuses, Shins, things like that. So, anyways, I do think that he is really good. He has been very good for several patches if you hit that hook, if you get those picks. But he does fall off later, and he is going to get stomped by something like Yuumi, Rakan, or Lulu in like a 25-minute plus game. But nevertheless, he's very, very good on 0 items and, maybe 1 item. So up to 20 minutes. You got to make it happen. You got to roam around. You got to hit those hooks. So good champ, but definitely high risk, high reward. And then Lulu I have up here as well. Now, she has fallen down in win rate a pretty decent chunk. I don't remember what her win rate is at Worlds. I know she has been played some. Usually she's getting paired with... blanking out on his name, the guy that has all the different guns, Aphelios, because that's kind of their hyperscaler of choice right now at Worlds. If you either pick Misfortune, if you want team fights, or if you just want like massive, I guess Aphelios is very good at team fights too, but Misfortune's kind of that early game, off of like 1 item, you can dominate team fights with stuff like Jarvan and Amumu and things like that. And then Aphelios is more, you pick the Lulu and you go to scale and really take over like 2 or 3 items. So it just kind of depends on where your power spikes are and how your composition's functioning. But that's really where we're seeing Lulu the most. and we really haven't seen her that much. She's just 4-4 right now, so she's only picked sparingly. How's Aphelios doing, by the way? Really well at 61%. So there's a chance we could see her more often. You don't have to have her with Aphelios, but I think people were trying to do that to match the Yuumi, from what I'm remembering. But anyways, I still think that she's very good. And even though she has a lower win rate than the other enchanters, I just feel if you pick her into the right spots, then she has a lot more potential to take over, especially if Yuumi is banned. So those are some conditions. She is a bit conditional for something that I would call S-class, but she's just so extreme, if positioned and played well, that I think she is going to be really strong. Now, her chart is not quite as convincing as far as scaling goes. That's a little surprising, honestly, in terms of like comparing it to Yuumi and Rakan. So I don't know. Maybe I'm overestimating her a little bit. But it's just her kit works so well with scaling champions because she gives out that extra attack speed here, up to 35%. This is what you're probably going to max outside of lane. You can either max the E or the W. But you give out move speed and attack speed, so it helps AD carries kite. And she complements that attack speed with her passive picks. I don't know if it has it on here or not. But in the mid game, it basically hands out like 80 damage per attack. So if it's a champion that already has a ton of attack speed, and she's putting Whimsy on them, she's, getting Ardent Sensor second, which is very popular. That might be a reason why she's a little bit lower, is a lot of people probably still want to go Ardent second. No, people are still going Putrefier. My theory was maybe they're not getting Putrefier as much as they should, but they are. Although that does lower her effectiveness because she really, really wants Ardent second, right? It just fits so well with her kit. So if she has to stop and get a Putrefier, it's not the end of the world, but you are losing part of the reason why you would play her, which is, for the hyper scaling. So pair her together with like a Kog'Maw, Twitch, Vayne, some of these champs that get a lot of attack speed. I think she can be very good. Now her ultimate does bypass grievous wounds, which is really nice. It's an infusion of health, but it does not scale very well. It has a low AP ratio, and it is not affected by plus healing and shielding. So it does not work with Moonstone, does not work with Redemption, or anything like that. So that might be why, if Yuumi or Sona go unchecked and they have Moonstone, like their scaling is just going to be so much higher with plus healing and shielding. Versus Lulu, she has the scaling with the attack speed and her picks, but her healing and shielding itself is going to be a little bit more lackluster in the scaling department compared to some of those other champs. So maybe that kind of explains the situation, but I still think that she can be pretty good, but I could definitely see an argument where you'd put her down in B tier. I just think that her potential is so high that I would just have her there. Okay, and then moving down a little bit. Now, Leona's another one that's going to be somewhat controversial here. I have her a bit lower just because she is pretty good in pro, although, again, she kind of fell off a cliff at the end. She's at 35% in pro. Oh, that's all. Okay, so Lulu's a little bit better in groups than she was in the play-ins, I suppose, because, yeah, Leona's fallen off a cliff in groups. So 35% here, and then I think even in solo queue, she's like 50% or something like that. And I realize that Yuumi and Rakan are also about 50%. So, I mean, it's a tough call. She's 51. She is very, very good. I think she's the best of the engaged tanks. She doesn't have that scaling option, right? She can't really get stuff like Shirelia's comfortably, or, Ardent Sensors, Staff of Flowing Water, Putrefier. She just doesn't have access to a lot of those things. So her win rate does go up really early on in the game, but then she just kind of flatlines over time. This is kind of a misleading chart. It's like, it's saying that she goes up 6% in the first 15 minutes. It's like games can't even really end before 15 minutes. Unless so many Leonas are just like AFKing out of the game in the fountain or something. I don't really know like what's up with that chart, but it's a bit misleading. Her curve is really a lot closer to like, 49 or 50 to 52. She has a very narrow flatlined range. So she doesn't fall off a cliff late game, but she can definitely get outscaled. And And you would think that, with Enchanters being so popular right now, that she would be much better, right? You'd think that she'd have a great matchup into things like Yuumi, into things like, Lulu and Soraka and stuff like that. And I guess her Yuumi matchup is pretty good, right? She's got a 54% win rate against Yuumi. But some of the other ones aren't as good as you might initially suspect, right? Like, her matchup into Soraka is not that great. It's like 48% there. And then, what's her Sona matchup? 50% on Sona. So, she has solid engage. They did nerf her armor and magic resist on her W, which hurts her a little bit in the early game, especially when you're soaking a lot of minion damage if you want to engage through the minion wave, which she does very well. She can do that. Most other engage champs outside of Rakan can't engage through the wave. They have to look for hook angles. So she does have that going for her. A lot of damage in the early game. Her ultimate's on a very low cooldown, 90 seconds. You get to make a lot of plays with her. She has a ton of uptime on her abilities. So like her E, her Q are low cooldowns. You can really just stick to people and just keep that chain CC going. So I think she's the biggest sort of CC machine out there. And she can get Locket, which is really strong. It's just, when she engages, she has to go all the way in. So I think that makes her inherently a bit more dangerous. And it kind of limits what you can do with different lane positions. So, for example, if you're Blitzcrank or Nautilus, well, Nautilus maybe not a great example, but like Blitzcrank or Thresh, you can fish for hooks under tower. So if you play with an ADC that wants to push the wave up, a Draven, something like that, then you can still hook under tower and threaten people, right? In the early game, levels 2, levels 3, you can still look for those open field hooks while they're trying to CS and, put some serious damage on them, maybe even get them to blow a summoner. But with Leona, you can't really do that because you have to go all the way in, and you're going to soak those tower shots. So later on, if you're going for dives, she's great on dives. Once you get, a couple of armor items, when you have Aftershock plus your W, that's really good. But in the early game, it kind of limits your aggression. And if they're able to freeze just outside of their tower, right, if you kind of mismanage the lane, that's extremely bad for her because she can't go in to threaten. She also has no escapes. So if you get ganked, you're almost certainly dead. And that's, another issue as well, is just if you go in general and you don't have good vision coverage and someone shows up, the jungler, the mid laner, or whatever, you have no reverse gear. So you're probably going to die. Versus someone like Rakan, you can still get out. Someone with a longer distance hook, like a Thresh or a Blitz, you still get that distance, right? You're pulling them to you. You're not going all the way to them. So that just makes her inherently a little bit riskier in my book. So she's probably the best hard engage, like turbo aggression option, but you have to be really careful with your engages and just not get baited into taking bad fights. You have to really look at that mini-map, track it well, and make good decisions off of it. But if you can do that, I think she's still going to be, extremely strong. Another thing about like her ultimate, the final thing that I'll mention, is that with all the mobility in the game right now, you can dodge that, right? You get notice on it and you can just, dash out of it. So it is a low cooldown, but there is potentially a little bit more counterplay to that than something like a Nautilus missile, right? Where there are far fewer options to get out of that. Okay. Then we have Nami, and I don't know, it's debatable. You could put Sona over there as well, and I don't want this video to be too long, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up here in just a second. So Nami is particularly good with Lucian. That's been a powerhouse pick. People have been picking it a lot at Worlds. I'm not sure. It has actually been pretty successful. It's only a 30% representation, but that's still pretty good in group. So commonly picked with Lucian. The main reason for that is her E empowers Lucian's new passive that he has, one of his passive portions. So his double shot triggers your E twice on people, and it triggers his passive twice on people. And usually he takes press the attack. So it adds a lot of extra damage. And whenever he applies that slow, that sets you up to land your bubbles as well. So she's probably one of the best ranged hyper-aggression champions, specifically with Lucian. Also pretty good with things like Misfortune in the early game. And more people have been going towards this Electrocute build. Now, there's either a bug with this, or I don't know if it's intended, but the reason that people have been going Electrocute over Airy is that your E can now counts as stacks of Electrocute for you. So when Lucian goes in and double taps him with the E, and then either attacks them one more time or you attack them, then it triggers Electrocute. So it's much, much faster to trigger Electrocute than it ever has been in the past. And that's a lot of extra damage for these all-in, types of lanes, especially Lucian. And then you can get, Mandate early on, which plays into that even more, especially when they have pressed the attack. It's just so many random little triggers off of abilities and items and runes when you go with Lucian Nami, right? You have the double tap with his press the attack. And then you also have Nami with Electrocute, with her E, with Mandate. And then, she's also got her W, which she can throw and bounce around in there. So it's just so many damage coming from different angles. It's just really overwhelming for a lot of champions to deal with early on. So, anyways, I think that's a really good combination. So I think she's definitely high tier. You could even make an argument maybe she's S-class with Lucian. You are still squishy. You can get hooked. You can get engaged on. She doesn't scale as well as other champs. She only has one heal on a long cooldown with her W. So that's kind of bad, but just her ability to kind of speed people up with her E, add in that extra damage, and just really her oppression in the early game with all those procs is, what's kind of vaulted her to be a higher priority pick right now. And then we have Maokai, so we're starting to, these next two, I'm just kind of putting in here just out of respect to their stats. So I have not played Maokai in a while as support. I had a lot of success on him earlier on in the season, but it was kind of the AP hybrid Maokai with Mandate and Demonic Embrace. But they did recently buff Mandate, so that's probably helpful. But it looks like people are transitioning out and trying this kind of tank Maokai. So Maokai in general, the things that are really good about him, a few things. Number one, these seeds are amazing. They're one of the best vision control, things in the game. Because you can spam them out, they last for a really long time, and they do a hell of a lot of base damage, even if you have no AP. So they're just really, really OP. They're everything Teemo wishes that his shrooms were. Right? They're extremely good. So they're good. Now, if you max this, it is helpful. You do get more damage on it, for sure. But it still does quite a lot, right? Even if you don't max it, it's still going to do, 14% of their max health plus 40. So 40 damage plus 14% max health is still really, really nice. So you have that. His R, it just has an extremely massive hitbox. Basically, everyone just has to try to run off the screen, or they all have to stack behind one person, have one person soak one of those brambles, which isn't going to happen in solo queue most of the time. And if they don't have a proper big tank, then there's not going to be anyone really there to soak. So that's really solid as well. So he has a lot of CC, and this W is unavoidable. It's very similar to the concept behind why Nautilus's missile is so good. Is that it doesn't matter if you flash or dash or whatever, he's gonna get you. If he flashes and W's to get on top of you, you're done. Right? Now you have to be careful with that they don't pull you under tower or something, in the early game. But for the most part, it's a very, very reliable engage if you can get into range. And that's been one of the major problems is, the range on this, I don't think it says it here, but it's really short. It's 550 or something range. It might even be 500 range. So it's really hard to get into range typically because you don't have any speed ups. So you have to either use your flash or you have to flank to make this happen. Well, people have started going for this movement speed build, tanky movement speed build to help you out. So they're going Boots of Swiftness and then Dead Man's Plate to get the movement speed to be able to run in there and start these fights. So it is an interesting choice. There is a lot less counterplay by mobile champions. He has a ton of CC built into his kit. So he's going to have less tankiness in the early game and probably the late game, honestly, than something like a Leona. But he's got the better vision control and more reliability if he can get in range on the engage, just because no amount of movement is going to get you out of it. So I think that's handy. The Mandate build is still okay. It's still got a 54% win rate. And a lot of people are kind of opting, several of these have high win rates, so he does have a good suite of options. This Abyssal Mask is becoming increasingly useful, especially against AP teams. And he's one of the best users of Abyssal Mask because he does try to get so close, and once he does attach to people, then he can, stick to them a lot easier. So giving your team an extra 15% damage is obviously going to be good. Thornmail, going to be good for the Grievous Wounds factor. If you do want to go for, a little more damage with the AP build, especially if they also have a lot of tanks and the fights are going to be lasting longer, you can go for the Demonic Embrace. This is also good, really good for poking with seeds. You can also go for the Leandries. I haven't tried that since they lowered the cost on it. That might be interesting. I still would rather probably just go for Mandate, but all these options can be pretty good on him. So, I don't know. Maybe I'll have to try him out again. His win rate certainly has been pretty good. He did get a buff recently. I thought it was something that was pretty lackluster. I think it was like some extra health or something. But, he is winning right now, so that's good. And then we've got last couple of picks. Sona, still a really high win rate. If she goes unchecked, it's probably the highest scaling champion in the game, potentially, definitely on the support side, but you have to play safe. You have to have really good positioning. But again, if people, like I said earlier in the video, if people aren't building, Duskblade Talon, Duskblade Zed, if Fizz isn't getting picked as much, if everybody's just going for these Bruiser, Gore Drinker Sterix builds, which is still happening a lot, she's fine with that. If you want to have a long fight with shields and lifesteals, she's going to beat you at that game. She has more shields. She heals more than your lifesteal with Moonstone late game. So I think that she does fit into that meta really, really well, especially if it's slower and people are just kind of dirtling around. She's going to take over. So it looks like she does kind of fall off a bit later, but she doesn't have any engage herself. You can try to flash hit people with your ult or something. I mean, that option's there. I just don't think it's that great a lot of the time. But if everyone wants to do the 5v5 fight and, they can block for you or you can otherwise position well, it's going to be very good. She is great with Misfortune, right? Because if you can layer together in a team fight your ultimate with her ultimate, it is going to be quite strong. So she's good. Risky champion, but very reliable. Not a lot of decisions there. Not a lot of skill shots. So you get to really focus on your positioning, focus on the mini-map, to make sure that you're going to win these team fights. Nautilus would be one of the last ones that I'll mention. He's still pretty good. People are asking me why we're not seeing him in Pro as much. A big part of it is he's just so squishy compared to some of these other tanks. So compared to Leona specifically, he does have a high win rate. So, I mean, maybe we're going to see him a little bit more. But he's just really squishy in the early game, and he doesn't have any percent max health, so that's why you don't see him in solo lanes or in the jungle. His W is on a long cooldown. It's flat 12 seconds. It doesn't give him any extra armor or magic resist. It's just kind of a light shield. He can actually run out of mana too. His mana costs are fairly high. His E is pretty expensive, so he can put out good teamfight damage if he spams his E. But the mana costs are just so high. If you just play him and then play Leona and just compare those mana costs, it's crazy just how much of a difference it is. Leona's going to feel really, really OP. So you can get stuff like Frozen Heart to help him out, but that means you're not getting other items, like Thornmail or like Zeke's or something like that that Leona could get. Now, he does have his ultimate, which is very nice. It's difficult to dodge. There are some mechanics in the game, especially at really high level play, where people can dodge it that I haven't really discussed as much in the past, but that I thought about making this video. Right? You have if you're against Tristana, and I've had this happen to me before, it really sucks. If she can time that jump perfectly, she can get out of your missile. So if she times her little rocket jump and becomes immune to CC, right when that missile's going to hit her, that makes her immune. Obviously, Sivir can get immunity. I'm pretty sure Samira with her little spinning blades can get immunity to it. Ezreal, if it's just about to hit Ezreal and he times that E perfectly, kind of like with Sivir, he can get out of the CC. So that's probably why at Worlds you're not seeing him as much, just because, skilled players can get out of his ult. But he is very good into Misfortune, Aphelios, some of these other champs that have no CC immunity, Lucian, then he can be pretty good. So, solid champ. I think there are probably better options out there. And then the final couple I'll mention, I guess, Morgana's a good, counter pick against a lot of heavy CC champs. I'm just not a big fan of her in general. I think she's good, but she just basically has two abilities, and she, can get destroyed by things like Yuumi, Lulu, stuff like that later on in the game. It's just hard to be proactive with her. Like, if you do hit a lot of binds, that is good. So, I don't know. Maybe I'm not giving her enough credit, but I just see her more as a counter pick. She's okay. Thresh can be good, but he has had several nerfs. I think his matchups against some of these champs are really tough. You do have to snowball, like, turbo hard early on. I'd rather just play Blitzcrank if that's kind of your game plan. I think he's just much more brutal. It just doubles down on the hooks. But Thresh is still, like, pretty good. And then Amumu still has an okay win rate, but I think that he's pretty overrated in general. He also really has to succeed in the early game. He needs to hit those double bandages. He's going to fall off pretty hard late game, especially against teams with multiple range champions, so they can kind of spread out. So, he's okay, but I just think that he doesn't scale as well as some of the other champs out there. But anyways, that's going to be it for this video. I don't want it to be, super long. It's already longer than I intended, about 40 minutes. But, let me know what you think in the comments. Is there something that you think I'm overlooking? Or are there some new hot builds that you think I should take a look at? And then come by, check out the stream, on Twitch every night, usually starting around 11:30 or midnight Eastern Standard Time, typically going until 3 or 4 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Very friendly, chill community. We'd love to have you join us. And that's going to be it. Have a good day.